You gave him the last of our food, Mama. What are we supposed to eat now? Grace's voice cracked in the freezing dark, and Emily Carter had no answer. Only the empty can in her trembling hands, and the stranger's ragged breathing beside her, a dying biker she had chosen to save instead of feeding her own child. If you're watching this story unfold and you believe kindness still matters in this cold world, subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that bell and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from tonight. I read every single one, and I want to see just how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The overpass groaned under the weight of the wind, a low metal howl that never stopped, never softened, never gave an inch of mercy. Emily Carter pulled the thin blanket tighter around Grace's shoulders and watched her daughter's breath fog in the dark cabin of a car that hadn't run in 3 days. The engine was dead. The heater clicked and sputtered and gave off just enough warmth to keep frostbite a threat instead of a certainty. Outside, Detroit's winter tore through the concrete canyon beneath the highway like something with teeth. "Mama, I'm cold," Grace whispered, and those 3 words did more damage to Emily than anything else in the last 6 months combined. More than the eviction notice taped to their apartment door. More than the manager at the diner saying, "I can't keep giving you shifts. You can't show up for Emily. I got a business to run." More than sleeping in this car for 9 nights while telling her daughter it was an adventure, a camping trip, anything but the truth. "I know, baby, I know." Emily rubbed Grace's small hands between hers, trying to push warmth into fingers that had gone stiff and pale. "We're going to be okay." She didn't believe it, but mothers lie to their children in moments like this, and the lie was the only gift she had left to give. On the passenger seat sat 1 can of soup, chicken and stars, the label faded and dented from being carried in her jacket pocket for 2 days, saved, rationed, protected like it was made of gold. It was the last food either of them had. Not the last food in the car. The last food in the entire world, as far as Emily's life currently extended. She had already decided Grace would eat all of it. She would tell her daughter she wasn't hungry. She had told that lie before too. The sound came from far off first, a distant tearing of metal and asphalt, a scream of rubber that didn't end the way it should have. Then a crash, violent and close enough that Emily felt it in the ground beneath the car's tires. "Stay here," Emily said, already reaching for the door handle. "Mama, don't." "Grace, stay in the car. Lock the door behind me." She didn't wait for her daughter's protest. She stepped out into wind that cut through her jacket like it wasn't there, and she ran toward the wreckage on instinct alone. The same instinct that had once made her a nursing student before life rerouted her into something harder and colder than she ever imagined at 19. The motorcycle was on its side 30 feet from where it had clearly launched off an icy patch on the overpass ramp above. Metal screeched against concrete as the back wheel still spun slower than stopped. And beside it, sprawled across broken glass and torn asphalt, was a man. Big, even collapsed and bleeding. Emily could see the size of him, the leather vest soaked through at the shoulder, dark red spreading across a patch that read Hell's Angels in letters she recognized from every warning she'd ever heard about men like this. "Stay away, don't get involved. Those men are dangerous." "Hey," Emily said, dropping to her knees beside him, ignoring every warning her whole life had ever given her. "Hey, can you hear me?" His eyes opened, barely. Pain flooded through them, raw and immediate, and his lips moved without sound. "I need you to talk to me," Emily said, pressing her hands against the wound at his shoulder, feeling the heat of his blood soak through her fingers despite the freezing air. "Can you tell me your name?" "Jack," he managed the word, broken and wet. "Jack Miller." "Okay, Jack, okay. You're bleeding bad and it's freezing out here and I don't have a phone that works anymore, so you and I are going to have to figure this out together. You understand me?" He tried to laugh. It came out as a cough, instead blood flecking his bottom lip. "Lady, you shouldn't be out here. Neither should you, apparently." She ripped the sleeve of her own jacket without hesitation, wrapping it tight around the wound, applying pressure, the way she still remembered from a life she used to have. "Can you move your legs?" He tried. His right leg shifted, dragged, and pain contorted his face into something almost unrecognizable as human. Yeah, I can move them." "Good. That's good. Nothing's broken in your spine then, probably. Come on, we need to get you somewhere warmer, or that cold is going to kill you faster than the blood loss will." "Why, Jack rasped, his eyes locking onto hers with a strange, sharp focus even through the pain. Why are you helping me? Emily didn't answer right away. She was too busy hooking her arm under his good shoulder, throwing every ounce of her strength into hauling a 220-pound man off frozen ground. Because you're dying, she finally said. And I've got a daughter in that car over there, and if I don't help you, what kind of person does that make me in front of her? Something shifted in Jack Miller's face. Something that had nothing to do with the pain. Grace had unlocked the door despite every instruction, standing beside it with wide eyes as her mother dragged a bleeding stranger toward their broken-down car. Mama, who is that? Grace, baby, I need you to be brave for me right now. Okay? Help me get him inside. He's scary, Mama. He's hurt, sweetheart. That's all he is right now. Just hurt. Together, mother and daughter half-dragged, half-carried Jack Miller into the back seat, laying him across the worn upholstery as best they could in a space built for two, not three. Emily peeled off her own coat despite the cold burning through her thin sweater and packed it against his wound. You're gonna need heat, she muttered, mostly to herself, scanning the dead dashboard, the useless heater, the small blue flame of the emergency candle she kept for exactly this kind of freezing desperation. There's a soup can, Grace said quietly. On the seat. Emily's whole body went still. That can was supposed to be Grace's dinner. Her only dinner. The only food standing between her daughter and an empty stomach through a night that felt like it might never end. Jack's eyes, glassy with blood loss, tracked the exchange. Don't, he whispered. Don't you dare give that to me. That's for your kid. You're going into shock, Emily said, already unscrewing the small camping stove lighter she'd been saving and already pouring the contents of the can into the dented pot she used for melting snow into drinking water. Your body needs calories and warmth right now, or you're not going to make it till morning. Lady, my name's Emily, she said sharply, not looking at him, focused entirely on lighting the small flame with hands that shook from cold and adrenaline both. And I've made my decision. So you're going to drink this broth, and you're going to live, and then you're going to get out of my life and go back to whatever world men like you belong to. Grace watched her mother's hands work, watched the soup that was supposed to be hers get poured into a dented tin cup and pressed toward a stranger's cracked lips. Mama, Grace whispered, what am I going to eat? The question hung in the freezing air like a blade. Emily's jaw tightened. Her eyes burned not from the cold. We'll figure something out, baby. I promise. Jack's hand, weak and trembling, wrapped around Emily's wrist as she brought the cup to his mouth. His grip was barely strength at all, but something in his eyes carried more weight than his fingers could. Stop, he said. Give it to her. You need it more right now. I've survived worse than this, Jack said, though the tremor in his voice betrayed the lie. That kid hasn't eaten. I can see it. I can see it in her face. And you'll die if you don't eat something warm. Emily snapped back, tears finally breaking free and freezing halfway down her cheeks. So either you drink this or I watch a man bleed out in the backseat of my car in front of my 6-year-old, and either way, Jack Miller, I'm not going to live with myself if I don't try. Something in him broke, not from weakness. Emily would understand this later, once she had time to think about it, once the adrenaline faded and the shock settled into memory. It wasn't defeat that crossed Jack's face in that moment. It was recognition. Recognition of something he hadn't seen from another human being in longer than he wanted to admit. He drank the broth in silence, his throat working slowly, painfully, and when he finished, his eyes found Grace's small, frightened face watching from the front seat. I'm sorry, kid, he rasped. I'm sorry I took your dinner. Grace didn't answer. She just stared wide-eyed at the enormous, bleeding, tattooed stranger who had somehow ended up in the back of their dying car. Emily worked through the night without rest, checking Jack's bandage every 20 minutes, feeding the small candle flame to keep what little warmth they had circulating, watching his breathing with the careful vigilance of someone who had once trained to save lives and now found herself doing it in the back of a car instead of a hospital. Around 3 a.m, Jack's eyes opened fully for the first time since the crash, clearer, now sharper, the shock finally beginning to recede. You a nurse? He asked quietly. Almost was, Emily said, not looking up from checking his pulse. Life had other plans. What happened? Doesn't matter. It matters to me. You saved my life, lady. I think I'm owed a story. Emily's laugh came out bitter, exhausted. You're not owed anything. I did what anyone would have done. No, Jack said, his voice suddenly firm despite the pain lacing through it. No, you didn't. Most people would have driven past a wreck at midnight and told themselves it wasn't their problem. Most people wouldn't have given a stranger their kid's last meal. His eyes moved to Grace, curled asleep now, against the passenger door, exhaustion finally claiming her small body. You gave up everything you had for a man wearing patches that probably scared the hell out of you. They did, Emily admitted quietly. They still do, if I'm honest. Then why? Emily was quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on her daughter's sleeping face, pale and thin, in the dim candlelight. Because somebody has to still believe in something, even when everything's falling apart, even when it makes no sense, even when it costs you the last thing you've got. She looked up, meeting his eyes directly for the first time since she'd pulled him from the wreckage. I've got nothing left to lose, Jack Miller. Might as well lose it doing something right. Jack didn't respond. He simply watched her, his calculating and quiet, moving behind his exhausted eyes. Something Emily couldn't read and didn't have the energy left to try. Near dawn, when the worst of the bleeding had finally slowed and Jack's breathing had steadied into something closer to normal, Emily allowed herself to close her eyes for just a moment, her body finally giving in to exhaustion she'd been fighting for 9 straight days. She didn't see Jack reach slowly, painfully into the inside pocket of his ruined vest. She didn't see him pull free a small satellite phone, battered but functional. She didn't hear the whisper of his voice, barely audible, cracked with pain and cold, speaking into the receiver. It's Hawk, he rasped. I need you to hear me out, and I need you to move fast. A pause, a voice on the other end, low and urgent. There's a woman, Jack continued, his eyes drifting to Emily's sleeping form, exhaustion, and something that looked almost like Omarion crossing his battered face. She's got nothing, not one damn thing, and she gave me everything she had left without blinking. Another pause, longer this time. I need everyone. I need the whole club. Tonight. He gave an address, a location beneath an overpass most of Detroit had forgotten existed. This isn't a request, Jack said, his voice hardening despite the pain radiating through every word. This is a debt, and Hell's Angels don't leave debts unpaid. He ended the call, tucked the phone away, and let his head fall back against the seat, his eyes finally closing, though sleep didn't come easily through the pain. Morning arrived gray and merciless, the kind of cold that settled into bones and refused to leave. Grace stirred first, blinking against weak sunlight filtering through frost-covered windows, and found the strange biker from the night before still breathing, still alive, propped awkwardly across the back seat. Mama, Grace whispered, shaking her mother's shoulder. Mama, wake up. Emily's eyes snapped open, instinct pulling her upright before full consciousness caught up. What's wrong? He's still here, Grace said, staring at Jack with a child's uncomplicated wariness. Is he going to be okay? Emily checked his pulse, his breathing the bandage, now stiff with dried blood but holding. I think so, baby. I think he's going to make it. Jack's eyes opened at the sound of their voices, and for a long moment he simply looked at them both. Mother and daughter huddled together in a car that had become their entire world. You saved my life, he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Seemed like the thing to do, Emily replied. Exhaustion thick in her voice. Jack tried to sit up, wincing hard, one hand pressing against his bandaged shoulder. I need to get out of here. I need to get back to my people before they think the worst. You shouldn't be moving, Emily said sharply. You lost a lot of blood. I've got somewhere to be, Jack said, and there was something strange in his voice now. Something Emily couldn't quite place. Not fear, not pain, something closer to purpose. He managed to pull himself upright, leaning hard against the car door, breathing labored but steady. Before he stepped out into the freezing morning air, he turned back his eyes, finding Emily's, with an intensity that made her chest tighten. What's your name, your full name? Emily Carter. And your daughter, Grace. Emily's brow furrowed. Why do you need to know that? Jack didn't answer directly. Instead, he reached into his vest pocket, wincing at the movement, and pulled free a worn leather wallet thick with cash that Emily hadn't expected a dying man on the side of a freezing road to be carrying. He pressed it into her hands. Take this. I can't. You can and you will. His voice left no room for argument. This isn't charity, Emily Carter. This is a debt being paid, a small one. There's more coming. I don't want more. I don't want anything. I just wanted you to live. Something flickered across Jack's face, something raw and unguarded. "That's exactly why there's more coming," he said quietly. "People who give with nothing to gain, people like you, Emily. The world doesn't have enough of you left in it. And where I come from, we don't let that kind of thing go unanswered." He turned, favoring his injured leg heavily, and began limping toward the overpass ramp, where impossibly another motorcycle sat waiting, its rider a silent figure Emily hadn't even noticed arrive. "Wait," Emily called after him, confusion and exhaustion warring in her voice. When did... "Stay warm," Jack called back with Upo turning around. "Tonight's gonna get interesting." And then he was gone, swallowed by the gray morning light, leaving Emily standing beside her broken car with an unfamiliar wallet full of cash in her trembling hands and a feeling she couldn't name pressing hard against her ribs. "Mama," Grace said quietly, tugging at her mother's sleeve. "Is he coming back?" Emily stared at the empty overpass ramp, at the tire tracks already disappearing into fresh snowfall, at the strange heavy silence that followed a night unlike any other in her entire life. "I don't know, baby," she whispered. "I really don't know." The day passed in a haze of practicality Emily hadn't allowed herself in weeks. The cash from Jack's wallet, more money than she'd seen in 8 months combined, bought them a hot meal at a diner 2 miles down the road, warm coats from a thrift store that had just opened its doors, and enough gas to keep the car's small heater running through another freezing night. Grace ate until her stomach was full for the first time since Christmas, her small face flushed with warmth and relief that made Emily's throat tighten every time she looked at her. "Are we going to be okay now, Mama?" Grace asked around a mouthful of pancake syrup sticky on her chin. "I don't know, sweetheart," Emily said honestly. "But today, right now, we're okay. And that's something." She didn't tell Grace about the strange, unsettled feeling that had followed her since Jack Miller disappeared down that overpass ramp. She didn't tell her about the way his eyes had held hers, sharp and calculating, despite the pain, or the strange certainty in his voice when he'd said tonight's going to get interesting. She told herself it was nothing. A grateful stranger, a moment of desperate kindness, repaid nothing more. She was wrong, and some deep, instinctive part of her already knew it. By evening, they'd returned to the overpass, the only shelter they had left, despite the cash cushion now sitting in Emily's coat pocket. It wasn't enough for a hotel room, not with winter stretching endlessly ahead, and every dollar needing to last as long as humanly possible. Emily had learned in the hardest way imaginable exactly how far desperation could stretch a single-dollar bill. Grace fell asleep early, exhausted from a day of warmth and food, after weeks of neither. Emily sat awake staring out at the darkening sky, replaying the events of the previous night over and over, searching for some rational explanation for the unease sitting heavy in her chest. Around 9 o'clock, she felt it before she heard it. A vibration deep and rhythmic traveling up through the frozen ground and into the metal frame of the car. Emily's breath caught. The vibration grew low and steady, a sound she recognized instantly and instinctively feared the unmistakable growl of motorcycle engines, not one, not a handful, but dozens, then dozens more echoing off the concrete overpass in a wall of sound that seemed to shake the very air around them. "Grace," Emily whispered urgently, shaking her daughter awake. "Grace, baby, wake up. We need to move." What's happening?" Grace's voice was thick with sleep and immediate fear, picking up on her mother's panic instantly. I don't know, just stay close to me." Emily's hands trembled as she reached for the car door, some instinct screaming at her to run to hide to protect her daughter from whatever was approaching through the freezing dark. But another instinct, quieter but insistent, held her frozen in place. Because somewhere in the roar of approaching engines, she recognized a voice. "Emily Carter." The engines cut off in perfect unison, a silence so sudden and complete it felt like the world itself had stopped breathing. Emily stepped out of the way on legs that barely held her weight, staring into a wall of headlights, stretching further than she could see in either direction beneath the overpass. Bikers. Dozens upon dozens, then hundreds filling the frozen space beneath the highway, with an army of leather and chrome and steady, watchful eyes. At the front of that impossible convoy stood two men. One she recognized instantly, his arm now properly bandaged and secured in a sling, standing straighter than he had any right to after the injuries she'd tended less than 24 hours earlier. Jack Miller. Beside him stood another man, older, broader, his presence carrying a weight that made every hair on Emily's arms rise despite the freezing cold. His leather vest bore patches Emily didn't recognize, but instinctively understood signified something important, something that commanded the absolute stillness of every single person gathered behind him. "Emily," Jack said, his voice carrying easily through the frozen silence. "This is Griffin Hayes, president of our chapter." Emily's arms wrapped instinctively around Grace, pulling her daughter close, every protective instinct in her body screaming at the sheer number of strangers surrounding them in the dark. "Please," Emily said, her voice shaking despite her best efforts to steady it. "Please, we don't want any trouble. I just helped him because he was hurt. That's all this was. Please don't hurt my daughter." Griffin Hayes stepped forward and Emily braced herself, every muscle tensed for a threat that didn't come. "Mrs. Carter," Griffin said, his voice deep and measured, carrying none of the menace she'd braced herself for. "You misunderstand why we're here." "Then why are you here?" Emily's voice cracked exhaustion and fear, finally breaking through the composure she'd maintained through months of impossible hardship. "Why are there 500 of you standing under this overpass at 9 o'clock at night?" Jack stepped forward, wincing slightly at the movement, his eyes finding hers with an intensity that stole the breath from her lungs. "Last night," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the frozen air, "you gave a dying stranger your daughter's last meal. You had nothing left, and you gave it anyway. I don't understand what that has to do with—" "You saved my life," Jack said, cutting her off gently but firmly. "Now we save yours." Silence fell across the gathered crowd, heavy and absolute, 500 pairs of eyes fixed on one exhausted, frightened mother and her small, trembling daughter. "I don't need saving," Emily said, though her voice betrayed the lie even as she spoke it. "I don't need anyone's charity." "This isn't charity," Griffin Hayes said, stepping closer, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "This is family taking care of its own. And as of last night, Emily Carter, whether you understand it yet or not, you became part of ours." Grace tugged at her mother's sleeve, her small voice barely audible above the settling silence. "Mama, what's happening?" Emily had no answer to give her daughter. None at all, because standing beneath that frozen overpass surrounded by 500 motorcycles and men whose reputation had haunted every warning she'd ever received about danger and violence and things to fear in the dark, Emily Carter felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in longer than she could remember. Hope, terrifying and unfamiliar, cracking open the frozen wall she'd built around her heart just to survive. "What do you want from us?" Emily finally whispered. Griffin Hayes' expression softened just slightly, just enough for Emily to catch a glimpse of something human beneath the intimidating exterior. "Nothing," he said. "We want to give, that's all. Tonight, Emily Carter, your life changes. And by morning, nothing about your world is going to look the same again." Emily's breath caught in her throat, her heart hammering against her ribs as the weight of his words settled over her, heavy and impossible and terrifying all at once. Behind Griffin, the sea of engines roared back to life in perfect, thunderous unison, headlights sweeping across the frozen overpass like the opening of something Emily couldn't yet comprehend, something massive and unstoppable, already set into motion the moment she'd chosen compassion over fear in the freezing dark of the night before. Grace's small hand tightened around her mother's fingers. "Mama," she whispered, staring wide-eyed at the impossible army surrounding them. "I think something big is about to happen." Emily Carter had no idea, standing frozen beneath that overpass with her daughter's hand clutched in hers and 500 engines thundering around her, just how right her daughter's small, trembling voice truly was. Griffin Hayes raised one hand, and the engines behind him dropped instantly into idle, a low rumble, instead of a roar, though the sound still pressed against Emily's chest like a physical weight. "Get into the truck," Griffin said. "Both of you. It's warm." "I don't even know you," Emily said, planting her feet despite the trembling in her legs. "I'm not putting my daughter in a truck with strangers." "Smart," Griffin said, and something like approval flickered across his weathered face. "That's exactly the instinct that's kept you both alive this long. Keep it. But look behind me." Emily looked. A heated pickup idled 20 feet away, its interior light on empty except for a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair sitting patiently in the driver's seat, hands visible on the wheel. "That's Donna," Jack said. "She's my sister-in-law, raised 4 kids of her own. She's not going to hurt you or Grace, and if it makes you feel safer, I'll stand right outside that truck the whole time you're in it." "Why would you do that?" "Because trust isn't something you demand, Emily. It's something you earn. And you already earned mine last night. I'm just returning the favor." Grace tugged on Emily's sleeve. Mama, it's really cold. Emily looked down at her daughter's chapped lips, at the way her small body had already started shivering again, despite the coat they'd bought that morning. The choice when it came down to it wasn't really a choice at all. Okay, Emily said quietly. Okay, but you stand right there where I can see you. Wouldn't dream of moving, Jack said. Donna smiled warmly as Emily lifted Grace into the truck's cab, wrapping a wool blanket around her shoulders before Emily had even asked. Hi there, sweetheart. You like hot chocolate? Grace's eyes lit up despite himself. Yes, please. Good. I made a whole thermos just in case. Donna glanced at Emily, something knowing and gentle in her expression. You look like you could use one too. Emily accepted the cup with hands that hadn't stopped shaking since the engines first arrived. Why are you all doing this? Because Jack called Griffin at 4 a.m, bleeding and half out of his mind from blood loss, and the first thing out of his mouth wasn't about the crash, Donna said. It was about you, about a woman who gave her daughter's last meal to a stranger she had every reason to fear. She shook her head slowly. In 22 years married into this club, I've seen a lot of things. I've never seen Jack Miller talk about anyone the way he talked about you. Outside, Emily watched through the frosted window as more trucks arrived, their headlights sweeping across the empty lot beside the overpass, illuminating something Emily hadn't noticed in the darkness before. Rubble, blackened timber, the burned-out skeleton of what had once been a small house, decades of neglect, and a fire long since put out, leaving nothing but a scarred, empty plot of frozen earth. What is that place? Emily asked. Donna followed her gaze. That Emily Carter used to be a family's home before an electrical fire took it 11 years ago. City's owning the lot ever since, tied up in red tape, sitting empty, doing nobody any good. She sipped her own coffee, watching Emily's face carefully. Not anymore, though. What do you mean, not anymore? Before Donna could answer, the truck door opened and Jack leaned in, his face pale from the cold and the effort of standing so soon after his injuries, but his eyes bright with something Emily hadn't seen in him yet. Purpose, certainty. Emily, he said, Griffin needs to talk to you. It's time. Time for what? Come see. Emily hesitated only a moment before climbing down from the truck, Grace's small hand slipping into hers as her daughter insisted on coming too, refusing to be left behind despite the cold. Donna followed close behind, a steady, reassuring presence at Emily's shoulder. Griffin waited near the edge of the burned lot, a rolled set of blueprints tucked under one arm, his expression unreadable in the harsh glow of a dozen headlights now trained on the empty plot of land. Emily, Griffin said, I need you to understand something before anything else happens tonight. Okay. This isn't a gift with strings attached. This isn't us buying your loyalty or expecting anything from you in return beyond what you've already given. He unrolled the blueprints, holding them steady against the wind. Last night you saved the life of a man who's been my brother for 18 years. In this club, that's not a debt we forget. That's not a debt we let go unpaid. Emily stared at the blueprints, lines, and measurements meaning nothing to her exhausted, overwhelmed mind. I still don't understand what any of this has to do with me. This lot, Griffin said, tapping the paper, is yours. As of 6 o'clock this evening, when our lawyer filed emergency paperwork with the city and paid off 11 years of back taxes and liens in full. Emily's breath caught somewhere deep in her chest. What? And by sunrise, Griffin continued, his voice steady, unshakable. There's going to be a house standing on it. Your house, Emily Carter. Deed in your name. No mortgage, no debt, nothing but 4 walls, a roof, and heat that never runs out on you and your daughter again. The world tilted beneath Emily's feet. She reached instinctively for the truck beside her, needing something solid to hold on to, as the enormity of what she was hearing crashed over her in waves. That's not possible, she whispered. You can't build a house in one night. That's not how construction works. That's not how any of this works. It is when you've got 300 skilled tradesmen who owe their sobriety, their second chances, and in some cases their entire lives to this club, Griffin said. Electricians, carpenters, welders, plumbers, men who learned their trades in prison programs, in rehab centers, in places most people wrote them off completely. Men this club never gave up on. His eyes held hers steady and certain. Tonight, they're not going to give up on you either. Behind him, the convoy had begun to move with startling coordinated purpose. Trucks pulled forward, revealing flatbeds loaded with prefabricated wall sections, stacks of lumber generators, floodlights on tall stands that flickered to life, one by one, transforming the frozen, burned-out lot into something approaching daylight despite the late hour. "Mama," Grace whispered, staring wide-eyed at the sudden explosion of activity, "are they really building us a house?" Emily couldn't answer. Her throat had closed completely, tears freezing against her cheeks before she could wipe them away. "This is insane," she finally managed. "This is completely insane. You can't just people don't just give their daughter's last meal to a dying stranger either," Jack said quietly, stepping up beside her. "But you did. So maybe it's time you stop deciding what people can and can't do, Emily, and just let this happen." A shout rang out from somewhere near the flatbeds. "Foundation set! Bring the panels!" The controlled chaos exploded into full motion. Men swarmed the lot with a precision that stunned Emily, each person moving with clear purpose. No wasted motion, no confusion. A machine built from years of brotherhood and shared purpose that Emily had never witnessed outside of a military documentary. Emily Carter. Emily turned to find a woman approaching, clipboard in hand, wearing a hard hat over graying hair, her expression brisk and professional, despite the surreal circumstances. "That's me. I'm Patricia. I'm going to need you to make some decisions real quick if that's all right. Paint colors, cabinet finishes. We ordered standard fixtures, but if you've got preferences, now's the time." I don't... Emily's mind refused to process the question, too overwhelmed to consider something as mundane as paint colors in the middle of what felt like an impossible dream. "I don't know. Whatever's easiest." Patricia's expression softened. "Take your time, sweetheart. We've got hours. Just breathe for a second." Grace tugged on Patricia's sleeve, her small voice cutting through Emily's spiraling shock. "Can my room be purple, please?" Patricia crouched down to Grace's eye level, smiling warmly. "You know what, sweetheart? I think purple sounds absolutely perfect." Emily watched her daughter's face light up for the first time in longer than she could remember, and something inside her, some final wall she'd been holding up through months of impossible hardship, finally began to crack. "This is really happening," Emily whispered more to herself than anyone else. "This is actually really happening." "It is," Jack said quietly beside her, "and Emily, it's just getting started." As if summoned by his words, a massive flatbed truck rolled to a stop at the edge of the lot, its trailer loaded with something Emily couldn't quite process at first glance. Not lumber, not materials. An entire prefabricated house section, walls, already framed windows, already installed, waiting to be lifted and set into place by a crane that had arrived without Emily even noticing. "Where did that even come from?" Emily breathed. "Wisconsin," Griffin said. "We've got a brother who runs a modular home business. Got the call at 4 this morning, had the frame built and loaded by 6 tonight. Drove it here himself." He gestured toward a heavy-set man in his 60s, directing the crane operator with practiced hand signals. "That's Big Sam, 40 years in construction. Nobody builds faster or better." The crane groaned to life, lifting the massive wall section into the air with a smoothness that belied its size, swinging it slowly, carefully toward the foundation that had somehow already been poured and cured in the hours since Emily had first arrived beneath the overpass. "How is the foundation already set?" Emily asked, watching in stunned disbelief. "Concrete takes days to cure properly." "Special formula," Patricia said, not looking up from her clipboard. "Rapid cure mix usually reserved for emergency infrastructure repairs. Costs a fortune, but Griffin authorized it the second the lawyer confirmed the deed transfer." "How much is all this costing?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper, the weight of it all pressing down harder with every passing minute. Griffin's expression remained steady, unbothered. "Doesn't matter. It matters to me." "Emily," Griffin said, turning to face her fully, his voice carrying the same unshakable certainty he'd shown since the moment she'd first seen him. "You gave everything you had down to your daughter's last meal to save a man you'd never met. You didn't calculate the cost. You didn't ask what it would take from you. You just acted because it was right." His eyes hardened slightly, though not unkindly. "So don't ask me to calculate the cost either. Some things aren't meant to be measured that way." The wall section lowered into place with a heavy, satisfying thud, workers immediately swarming to bolt it into position, the skeleton of a home rising from nothing before Emily's disbelieving eyes. Framing's up in 20, someone shouted. Get the electrical crew staged, another voice called back. Emily stood frozen amid the controlled chaos. Grace's small hands still clutched tightly in hers, watching walls rise and take shape with a speed that defied everything she understood about the world. Mama, Grace whispered, staring at the emerging structure with wide, awestruck eyes. Is that going to be our house, like our real house? I think so, baby. Emily managed her voice thick with emotion she could no longer contain. I really think so. A second flatbed arrived, then a third, each one carrying additional wall sections. Roof trusses, materials. Emily couldn't begin to identify the burned-out lot, transforming minute by minute into something that increasingly resembled an actual home. Sparks flew from welding equipment near the foundation's edge, where two men worked with practiced precision on what Emily assumed was some kind of structural support. That's Marcus and Dion, Jack said, following her gaze. Both of them learned welding inside. Marcus did 6 years for armed robbery before this club got hold of him. Dion did 4 for a drug charge that shouldn't have carried the sentence it did. His voice carried no judgment, only quiet respect. This club gave both of them a trade, a purpose, a family that didn't write them off the second they made a mistake. Tonight they're using that trade to build you a home. Emily watched the two men work their movements, confident and skilled, Sparks' illuminating faces set in fierce concentration. You give people second chances. We give people the only thing that actually works, Griffin said, stepping closer. Loyalty. Most of society throws people away the second they slip up. We don't. We can't afford to, because every single person here knows what it feels like to be given up on, and none of us are willing to do that to anyone else ever again. A sudden shout cut through the night, is sharp and urgent. We got a problem with the electrical panel, main breaker spot. Griffin's radio crackled to life. Copy sending Reyes. Emily watched a young man no older than 25 sprint across the lot toward a panel of exposed wiring near the foundation's edge, tools already in hand. Is that dangerous? Emily asked, alarm creeping into her voice as she watched the young electrician work with startling speed on live components. Reyes has been doing electrical work since he was 16, Jack said. His father was a master electrician who died when Reyes was 17. Left him with nothing but a set of tools in a trade half-learned. This club finished his training. Now he's better than his old man ever was. You're telling me every single person here has some kind of story like that? Every single one, Griffin confirmed. That's what this club actually is, Emily. Not what the news says, not what people assume when they see the patches and the bikes and get scared. We're the people the rest of the world gave up on, choosing to give ourselves a second chance and then giving that same chance to anyone else who needs it. His eyes met hers directly. Last night you needed it. Tonight we're making sure you get it. The breaker panel sparked once dangerously, and Emily flinched instinctively, pulling Grace closer. Got it, Reyes called out, stepping back from the panel, sweat visible on his brow despite the freezing temperature. We're clear. A collective exhale rippled through the nearby workers, tension breaking as the crew resumed their frantic pace, walls continuing to rise, roof trusses beginning to take shape against the dark winter sky. Emily, Patricia approached again, clipboard still in hand, expression apologetic. I know this is a lot, but I really do need those paint colors. Crew's going to be ready to prime the interior walls within the hour. Emily stared at the woman, still struggling to process the sheer speed of everything unfolding around her. I don't even know what colors are available. Whatever you want, sweetheart. Anything you want. Emily's mind raced back through years of quiet, private dreams she'd buried so deep she'd almost forgotten they existed. A yellow kitchen, sunny and warm. A soft gray for the living room. And Grace's room, purple? Emily said, suddenly surprising herself with the sudden clarity. Grace's room needs to be purple, like she asked. And maybe soft yellow for the kitchen. Something warm. Patricia's smile widened as she jotted the notes down. Consider it done. As Patricia hurried off toward the assembling crew, Emily became aware of a low murmur spreading through the workers nearby, heads turning, voices dropping into hushed, urgent tones. She followed their gazes toward the edge of the lot where a single black SUV had pulled up, headlights cutting through the floodlit chaos. Who's that? Emily asked, unease creeping back into her chest. Jack's expression shifted instantly, something hard and alert replacing the warmth he'd shown moments before. That he said quietly shouldn't be here. Griffin's radio crackled again. Boss, we got a city inspector just rolled up. Says he got a call about unpermitted construction. Emily's stomach dropped. Unpermitted? You said this was all legal. You said the deed was transferred. It was, Griffin said, his voice remaining calm despite the sudden tension rippling through the crowd. Building permits take longer than deed transfers. We filed for emergency permits 3 hours ago. They're still processing. So this could all get shut down, Emily said, panic rising sharply in her chest. Right now, tonight, before it's even finished. Not if I have anything to say about it, Griffin said, already moving toward the SUV with purposeful, unhurried strides. Emily watched heart pounding as a man in a heavy city-issued coat stepped out of the vehicle, clipboard in hand, his expression already hardened with suspicion and irritation. This construction site doesn't have active permits on file, the inspector announced loudly enough for Emily to hear from 30 feet away. I need this shut down immediately, and I need everyone here to identify themselves. Inspector Doyle, Griffin said, extending a hand the man refused to shake. I understand your concern. Emergency permits were filed at 4 this afternoon. Should be in the system by morning. Should be isn't good enough, Doyle snapped. I've got a legal obligation to shut down any construction operating without documented approval. That includes this one. Emily's breath caught in her throat, watching the exchange unfold with growing dread. After everything, after the impossible miracle unfolding before her eyes, was it all about to collapse because of a technicality? Mama, Grace whispered, sensing the sudden shift in tension. What's happening? I don't know, baby, Emily whispered back, gripping her daughter's hand tighter. Jack moved closer to Emily, his voice low and urgent. Griffin's handled tougher situations than this. Trust me. How can you be so sure? Because Griffin Hayes doesn't lose. Not when it matters this much. Doyle's eyes swept across the construction site, taking in the sheer scale of the operation, the hundreds of workers, the half-completed structure, already rising from what had been an empty, burned lot mere hours earlier. This is the most reckless, unauthorized construction operation I've seen in 15 years on this job. Doyle said, his voice sharp with disbelief. I don't care how many emergency permits you claim to have filed. I'm shutting this down right now. Inspector Doyle, Griffin said, his voice dropping into something quieter, more deliberate. Before you make that call, I think there's something you should know about why we're building this house tonight. I don't care about your reasons. You should, Griffin said. Because the woman standing behind me gave a dying stranger her daughter's last meal in the middle of a freezing night with absolutely nothing left to give and no reason to trust him. His eyes hardened. That stranger was my brother. And in about 6 hours, this woman and her 6-year-old daughter are going to have a real home for the first time in longer than either of them can remember. Unless you decide tonight is the night you want to be the reason that doesn't happen. Doyle's expression flickered uncertainty creeping into his hardened features for the first time since he'd arrived. I have a job to do, he said, though his voice carried less conviction than before. So do we, Griffin replied. And Inspector Doyle, I promise you the paperwork will be in perfect order by the time the sun comes up. All I'm asking is that you give us until morning before you make any final decisions. The tension stretched painfully long, the entire lot falling into an uneasy silence as workers paused mid-task watching the confrontation unfold. Emily held her breath, Grace's small hand trembling in hers, the impossible dream she'd only just begun to believe in hanging by the thinnest of threads. Doyle's eyes moved past Griffin, finding Emily and Grace as standing amid the chaos, mother and daughter wrapped in donated coats, exhaustion and hope, warring plainly across both their faces. Something shifted in the inspector's expression. You said this woman gave up her kid's last meal to save someone's life, Doyle asked quietly. Every last bite, Griffin confirmed. Doyle was silent for a long moment, and his eyes lingering on Grace's small, hopeful face. Then he sighed heavy and resigned and closed his clipboard with a decisive snap. I'm going to need that paperwork in my office by 9 a.m. sharp, he said, not a minute later. You'll have it by 7, Griffin said. And I never saw any of this tonight, Doyle added, already turning back toward his vehicle. Officially, I was never here. As the SUV pulled away, disappearing back into the darkness beyond the floodlights, a collective exhale swept through the gathered crowd, tension breaking into renewed determination. Back to work, someone shouted. We got a house to finish. The pace resumed immediately faster now, more urgent, as if the brief interruption had only intensified everyone's resolve. Emily watched Griffin walk back toward her, something like relief finally crossing his otherwise unreadable features. That was close, Emily breathed. Closer than I'd like, Griffin admitted. But it's handled. What if he'd said no? What if he'd shut it all down right there? Then we would have found another way, Griffin said simply. This isn't a one-shot deal, Emily. We don't give up because the first obstacle shows up. We adapt. We find the next path forward. That's what family does. Emily's eyes drifted back toward the rapidly rising structure walls, now fully framed roof trusses, beginning to lock into place under the combined efforts of dozens of skilled hands working in perfect practiced coordination. I still can't believe this is happening, she whispered. Get used to that feeling. Jack said, a faint smile finally breaking through his exhaustion. Because we're just getting started. Hours blurred together in a haze of exhaustion and disbelief as boss Emily watched her impossible new home take shape around her. Grace had fallen asleep against Donna's shoulder inside the warm truck sometime after midnight, worn out from the sheer, overwhelming excitement of the night's events. Emily herself drifted between moments of stunned silence and sudden overwhelming waves of emotion she couldn't fully process watching. Walls rise, windows install. A roof take final shape against the pre-dawn sky. Around 4 a.m, as exhaustion threatened to finally overtake her, a woman Emily hadn't met yet approached carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. You look like you could use this, the woman said, offering one of the cups. I'm Sarah, Griffin's wife. Emily accepted gratefully, wrapping frozen hands around the warm cup. Thank you for all of this. I still don't fully understand it, but thank you. Sarah's expression softened with quiet understanding. You don't have to understand it right away. Took me years to fully understand what this club actually is, and I married into it. She glanced toward the rapidly forming structure. All you need to know right now is that you're safe. You and your daughter both. That's not going to change. Why does that matter so much to all of you? I'm a stranger. I gave your friend some soup. That's it. Sarah's eyes carried something deep in knowing. You gave him hope in a moment when the whole world had every reason to turn its back on him. That's not nothing, Emily. That's everything. She paused, watching the workers with quiet pride. Every single person out there tonight knows exactly what it feels like to be given up on. And every single one of them made a choice at some point in their lives to become the kind of person who refuses to let that happen to someone else. Emily's throat tightened, tears threatening again despite her exhaustion. I don't know how to repay something like this. You already did, Sarah said gently. The moment you chose him over your own daughter's dinner, you paid a debt most people wouldn't have even recognized existed. As dawn approached, the frantic pace of construction began shifting into something calmer. More deliberate workers moving through final details with careful precision instead of urgent speed. Emily watched transfixed as the last of the exterior siding was secured into place, windows gleaming under the fading floodlights, a small covered porch taking shape at the front entrance. Emily, Patricia approached again, exhaustion evident in her voice, but excitement lighting her tired eyes. Interior's ready for final walkthrough. You want to see your house? Emily's breath caught. It's actually finished. Structurally, yes. Furniture and final touches are still being handled, but the house itself, Emily, it's done. Emily glanced toward the truck where Grace still slept peacefully against Donna's shoulder. Should I wake her? Let her sleep a little longer, Patricia said with a gentle smile. Trust me, you're going to want her fully rested for what's coming next. Emily's legs felt unsteady as she approached the house, the structure rising before her in the pale light of approaching dawn, solid and real, and impossibly miraculously complete. A soft yellow glow spilled from the front windows, warm light against the fading darkness, and Emily's hand trembled as she reached for the front door handle. Jack appeared at her side, his own exhaustion evident despite his efforts to hide it. Ready. I don't think I'll ever be ready for this, Emily admitted. Good, Jack said, a genuine smile finally breaking through the exhaustion etched across his face. Because some things you're not supposed to be ready for. You're just supposed to let yourself feel them. Emily pushed open the front door, stepping into a warmth that had nothing to do with the temperature and everything to do with the impossible, overwhelming reality settling over her at last. The interior stretched before her freshly painted walls, glowing soft yellow in the kitchen, exactly as she'd requested, a small but comfortable living room already furnished with a couch and a coffee table, Details Emily hadn't even had time to consider now, somehow already in place. How? Emily whispered, her voice breaking completely. How is any of this even possible? Family, Jack said simply. That's how. Emily moved through the house in stunned, tearful silence, finding a small bedroom painted the exact soft purple Grace had requested, a single bed already made up with fresh linens, a small nightlight already plugged into the wall. She's gonna love this, Emily whispered, pressing a trembling hand against her lips. She already does, Jack said. I can tell. Emily turned to face him, fully overwhelming, gratitude and disbelief warring plainly across her exhausted features. I don't know how to thank you for this. Any of this. I don't even know where to begin. Jack's expression grew serious, something deep and unspoken passing behind his tired eyes. You don't need to thank me, Emily. You already gave me everything I needed the moment you chose to save a stranger over your own comfort. He paused, his voice growing quieter. But there's something else you should know. Something I haven't told you yet. Emily's chest tightened with sudden apprehension. What is it? Jack hesitated, glancing toward the window where dawn light had begun spilling gently across the newly finished house. This isn't just about paying back a debt, Emily. There's more to why Griffin authorized something this massive on such short notice. More to why this club moved as fast as it did. What do you mean? Before Jack could answer, the front door swung open and Griffin stepped inside, his expression carrying a gravity Emily hadn't seen from him yet, even amid everything that had already happened that night. Emily, Griffin said, there's something we need to discuss. Something that changes everything you think you understand about last night. Emily's stomach dropped, exhaustion and confusion colliding into sudden, sharp fear. What are you talking about? Griffin's eyes met Jack's briefly, something unspoken passing between them, before he turned back to Emily, his voice steady but heavy with implications she couldn't yet grasp. The man whose car crashed into Jack's motorcycle last night, Griffin said slowly. It wasn't an accident. The words hit Emily like a physical blow, the warmth of the newly finished house suddenly feeling distant and unreal against the sudden, icy dread spreading through her chest. What do you mean it wasn't an accident? Emily whispered. Jack's jaw tightened, his eyes carrying a hard, dangerous edge Emily hadn't seen from him before. Someone ran me off that road on purpose, Emily, and we think it might have something to do with you. Something to do with me? Emily's voice cracked, disbelief and fear colliding at once. That's not possible. I don't know anyone who'd want to hurt Jack. I don't know anyone who'd want to hurt anybody. You don't have to know them, Griffin said, his voice low and grim. They already know you. Emily's hand found the wall behind her, needing something solid to hold on to as her legs threatened to give out. I don't understand. Jack stepped closer, his expression carrying none of the warmth from moments earlier, replaced now by something sharp and focused. Emily, I need you to think back. In the last few weeks, has anyone approached you? Anyone asking questions about you, about Grace, about where you've been staying? Emily's mind raced back through the blur of the last several months' eviction notices and shelter wait lists and desperate nights spent parked in different corners of the city. No, nobody's approached me. Why would anybody care about a homeless woman and her kid? That's exactly what we're trying to figure out, Griffin said. Because the man driving the car that ran Jack off the road last night wasn't drunk, wasn't texting. Traffic cam caught the whole thing before it went dark. He accelerated directly into Jack's lane. No brake lights, no swerve, straight line full speed. Maybe he was reckless. Maybe he panicked. Emily, Jack's voice softened, though his eyes remained hard. I've been riding for 20 years. I know the difference between an accident and an attack. That wasn't an accident. Emily pressed both hands against her face, trying to steady the sudden spin of the room around her. Okay, say you're right. Say somebody did this on purpose. What does any of that have to do with me? Griffin exchanged another glance with Jack before answering. Because the crash happened less than 200 yards from where you and Grace were parked, and our people pulled the plates on that vehicle an hour ago. He paused, weighing his next words carefully. It's registered to a shell company, one that traces back through about 4 layers of paperwork to a man named Victor Cole. The name meant nothing to Emily. She shook her head slowly. I don't know that name. You wouldn't, Jack said, but your late husband might have. The room seemed to tilt sideways. Emily's breath caught somewhere deep in her chest, old grief and sudden confusion crashing together violently. Don't, she whispered, Don't bring him into this. He's been gone 3 years. I'm sorry, Jack said, and he genuinely looked it. But we need to ask, did Daniel Carter ever mention that name, Victor Cole? Emily's mind raced backward through fragments of memory she'd spent years trying to bury late-night arguments, Daniel's increasingly erratic behavior in the months before the accident that took his life, the strange phone calls he'd taken in the garage with the door shut. She told herself it was work stress. She told herself a lot of things back then. He worked construction, Emily said slowly, her voice unsteady. Foreman on a commercial site downtown. The last few months before he died, he seemed off, scared almost. He kept saying something about paperwork that didn't add up, materials that weren't up to code. I thought he was just stressed about the job. What was the site? Griffin asked, his voice suddenly sharper, more urgent. The Whitmore Tower project, downtown off Jefferson. Emily's heart hammered against her ribs as the pieces began horribly to align. Why does that matter? Jack's jaw tightened. Because Victor Cole owns half the commercial development in this city, Emily. Whitmore Tower included. Silence stretched, heavy and suffocating through the small, newly finished living room. The warmth of the house suddenly feeling like the thinnest possible shield against something vast and dangerous closing in from outside. Daniel didn't die in a car accident, Emily whispered, the realization crashing over her all at once, 3 years of grief and unanswered questions rearranging themselves into something far darker than she'd ever allowed herself to consider. Did he? Griffin's silence was answer enough. Oh my God. Emily's knees buckled, and Jack caught her by the elbow before she collapsed, entirely guiding her gently onto the couch that had appeared impossibly in her living room only hours before. Oh my God, they killed him. They killed my husband, and I never even... We don't know that for certain yet, Jack said quickly, crouching in front of her. But we're going to find out, that much I promise you. Why now? Emily's voice cracked, tears finally breaking free in full force. If Victor Cole had something to do with Daniel's death, why wait 3 years? Why come after Jack now for something that has nothing to do with him? Griffin's expression darkened further. Because 2 nights ago, before any of this happened, before Jack's crash, before any of us knew your name, our lawyer got an anonymous call. Someone claiming to have documents proving safety violations on the Whitmore project. Documents that could tie Victor Cole to Daniel Carter's death directly. Emily's head snapped up. Who called? We don't know, Griffin admitted. Voice was disguised. Call came from a burner phone we haven't been able to trace yet. But whoever it was, they gave us your name, Emily. Said you might have something in your possession without even realizing it. Something Daniel left behind. Emily's mind raced back through the handful of boxes she'd kept from their old apartment. The meager possessions that had survived months of eviction and homelessness packed away in the trunk of her broken car, parked less than a mile from where they now stood. There's a box, Emily said slowly. Daniel's old work things. I never went through it. I couldn't. It hurt too much. Jack's eyes sharpened. Where is it now? In my car, under the overpass. Griffin was already reaching for his radio. Reyes Marcus, get to the old vehicle site, secure whatever's inside. Nobody touches it but us. Wait, Emily said, panic rising sharply. You think somebody's going to go after that box? I think, Griffin said grimly, that whoever ran Jack off the road last night did it because they already knew you'd helped him and they wanted him dead before he could connect the dots back to you, which means somebody's watching you far closer than any of us realized. The words hung in the air like a blade, and Emily's protective instincts surged instantly toward the truck outside, toward her sleeping daughter, utterly unaware of the danger that had apparently been circling them for longer than any of them understood. Grace, Emily breathed, already moving toward the door. I need to see Grace. She's safe, Jack said quickly, following close behind her. Donna hasn't left her side all night, and there's 6 of our people stationed around that truck right now. That's not the same as safe, Emily snapped, fear sharpening her voice into something fierce and protective. You just told me somebody killed my husband and tried to kill you last night. My daughter is not safe until I know exactly what's happening. She burst through the front door into the pale gray light of early dawn, sprinting across the frozen yard toward the truck, her heart hammering violently against her ribs. Donna looked up in alarm as Emily wrenched open the door, immediately checking Grace's still sleeping form for any sign of disturbance. She's fine, Donna said softly. Slept the whole time. Hasn't moved an inch. Emily's breath left her in a shuddering rush, relief and terror tangled together so tightly she could barely separate them. She gathered her daughter's small sleeping body into her arms, holding her close despite the awkward angle, needing the physical reassurance more than logic could provide. Emily, Jack's voice, gentle but urgent, came from just behind her. We need to talk about next steps. And I know this is a lot. I know, but you just found out things that changed everything you thought you understood about your husband's death. But time might actually matter here. Emily turned, Grace still cradled against her chest, exhaustion and fear and grief warring visibly across her face. What kind of next steps? Protection, Griffin said, joining them, his expression grave. Real protection, not just a house and some good intentions. If Victor Cole's people are willing to run a man off the road to keep information buried, they're not going to stop just because we outmaneuvered them once. So what I just lived the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. In a house you built me, wondering every single day if today's the day someone comes to finish what they started 3 years ago. No, Jack said firmly. That's not what any of us are suggesting. We're suggesting we find out exactly what Daniel discovered, exactly what's in that box, and we make sure it gets into hands that can actually do something about it. Federal hands if it's as serious as we think. The FBI, Emily's voice rose with disbelief. You want to bring in the FBI? I've got a contact, Griffin said. Agent named Foster, worked organized crime and construction fraud cases for the last decade. He owes this club a favor from a few years back, and more importantly, he's clean. No connections to City Hall, no ties to anyone Victor Cole could have bought off. Emily's mind reeled, the sheer speed and scale of everything unfolding, threatening to overwhelm her entirely. Less than 12 hours ago, she'd been huddled beneath a freezing overpass with nothing but a single can of soup between her daughter and starvation. Now she stood in a house that hadn't existed the day before, holding her sleeping child, hearing that her husband's death might have been murder disguised as an accident. I need a minute, Emily whispered. I need just 1 minute where the entire world isn't falling apart around me. Jack's expression softened immediately, guilt flashing across his tired features. You're right. I'm sorry. We're moving too fast. No, Emily said, shaking her head slowly, forcing herself to breathe through the panic clawing at her chest. No, you're not moving too fast. If somebody killed Daniel, if somebody's willing to hurt people to keep that buried, then we don't have the luxury of slowing down. I need to see that box. I need to know what he was hiding from me. Marcus and Reyes returned within the hour, a battered cardboard box secured carefully in the back of their truck, its contents undisturbed. Emily's hands trembled as she carried it into the kitchen, setting it on the counter that hadn't existed 12 hours earlier, the soft yellow walls around her feeling suddenly foreign against the weight of what she was about to uncover. You don't have to do this alone, Sarah said gently, standing beside her. Emily nodded, unable to speak, and lifted the box's flaps. Inside sat Daniel's old hard hat, his tool belt, a few faded photographs of the two of them from before Grace was born. And beneath those, wrapped carefully in a plastic bag, Emily didn't remember packing a stack of papers, handwritten notes in Daniel's familiar cramped handwriting, photographs of steel beams marked with red circles, invoices with numbers crossed out and rewritten. Oh my God, Emily whispered, her hands shaking as she lifted the papers free. He knew, he actually knew. Jack leaned over her shoulder, his expression darkening as he scanned the documents. These are structural inspection reports, falsified ones from the look of it. Somebody signed off on steel that didn't meet code. Whitmore Tower, Emily breathed, reading Daniel's frantic handwriting scrawled across the margin of one report. He wrote here that if this building goes up with substandard steel, it's not going to hold in an earthquake, a fire, anything beyond normal load. People could die. People did die, Griffin said grimly, having taken the papers from Jack's hands, his expression hardening further with every page he turned. Emily, do you remember the parking garage collapse at Whitmore 2 years ago? Killed 3 maintenance workers? Emily's blood ran cold. That was ruled an accident. Faulty design, they said. It wasn't faulty design, Griffin said, holding up one of Daniel's photographs, steel beams marked with damning red circles. It was exactly what your husband tried to warn somebody about before he died, and somebody made sure he never got the chance to tell anyone else. Emily's legs gave out entirely, and Jack caught her before she hit the floor, lowering her gently into a kitchen chair as sobs finally broke free after 3 years of suppressed grief and unanswered questions. They killed him, Emily choked out. They killed him to keep this quiet, and then 3 people died anyway because nobody ever found out the truth. We're going to find out the truth now, Griffin said, his voice hard with resolve. Every single page of this, and Victor Cole is going to answer for every single life this cost. Grace stirred in Donna's arms nearby, drawn awake by the sound of her mother's crying, her small face immediately creasing with confusion and worry. Mama, why are you crying? Emily wiped frantically at her tears, forcing a smile she didn't feel for her daughter's sake. I'm okay, baby. I'm okay. Just a lot happened today. Grace toddled over, wrapping small arms around her mother's neck, and Emily held her close, breathing in the simple, uncomplicated comfort of her daughter's presence amid the chaos threatening to swallow her whole. Is this really our house? Grace whispered, looking around the kitchen with wide, sleepy eyes. It really is, sweetheart. Is my room really purple? Despite everything, despite the devastating revelations of the last hour, Emily found herself laughing softly through her tears. It really is. You want to go see it? Grace nodded eagerly, and for just a moment, Emily allowed herself the mercy of her daughter's simple joy, walking hand in hand toward the small bedroom, leaving the weight of Victor Cole and Daniel's murder, and 3 years of buried grief in the kitchen behind them. But the reprieve didn't last. By mid-morning, Griffin's contact agent Foster had arrived, a tall man in his 40s with tired eyes and a demeanor that immediately struck Emily as sharper and more careful than most law enforcement she'd encountered in her life. He reviewed Daniel's documents in near total silence, his expression growing increasingly grim with every page. This is significant, Foster finally said, setting the last page down carefully. More significant than I think any of you fully realize. Meaning what exactly? Griffin asked. Meaning Victor Cole isn't just cutting corners on a single building project, Foster said. These falsified inspection reports, the pattern here, it matches evidence we've been quietly gathering for the last 18 months on a much larger investigation. Cole's been systematically bribing city inspectors across at least 6 different development sites. Substandard materials, falsified safety documentation kickbacks to officials who looked the other way. He looked up, meeting Emily's eyes directly. Your husband's notes could be the missing piece that finally lets us build an airtight federal case. 3 people died because of this, Emily said, her voice hollow. My husband might be a 4th. How long has this been going on? Based on what I'm seeing here, at least 5 years, Foster said grimly. Maybe longer. And nobody caught it. Nobody noticed a pattern of buildings failing, inspections that shouldn't have passed in the first place. Cole's smart, Foster said. He spreads the corruption thin enough that individual incidents look like isolated accidents. Bad luck, unfortunate oversights. It's only when you compile everything together like your husband apparently started doing that the pattern becomes undeniable. Griffin's expression darkened further. And now that Cole knows Emily has this evidence, now she's a target, Foster said bluntly, which means all of you are targets by extension. Cole's not going to stop at running a motorcycle off the road. If he thinks federal charges are closing in, he's going to get desperate, and desperate men do dangerous things. Emily's arms wrapped instinctively tighter around Grace, who had wandered back into the kitchen, drawn by the tension in the adults' voices, despite not understanding the words. What do we do? We move fast, Foster said. I need to get this evidence into an official chain of custody, immediately get warrants moving before Cole realizes exactly how much we already have. And you and your daughter need protection. Real protection, 24 hours a day, until this case is far enough along that removing you from the equation wouldn't stop it. I can provide that protection, Griffin said immediately. Foster's eyebrows rose slightly. You understand what you'd be taking on. Victor Cole's got resources, connections, people willing to do serious damage to protect an empire like the one he's built. So do we, Griffin said simply. Emily and Grace aren't going anywhere without someone from this club within arm's reach until Victor Cole is behind bars. That's not negotiable. Foster studied Griffin for a long moment before nodding slowly. All right, I'll take whatever help I can get on this. God knows the department's resources are stretched thin enough as it is. As Foster gathered the documents carefully into an evidence bag, promising to return within 24 hours with updates, Emily found herself sinking into a kitchen chair, the adrenaline of the morning finally beginning to fade into bone-deep exhaustion. I don't know how to process any of this, she admitted quietly. 12 hours ago, I was worried about how I was going to feed my daughter tonight. Now I'm being told my husband was murdered and some corrupt developer might come after me next. Jack sat down across from her, his own exhaustion evident despite his efforts to remain steady for her sake. You don't have to process all of it right now. You just have to get through today. Tomorrow, we'll get through tomorrow. One day at a time, that's all any of us can really do. How do you do it? Emily asked. How do you face something like this without falling apart completely? Jack was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant, remembering something Emily couldn't see. I didn't always. There was a time before this club, before any of this, when I fell apart completely. Lost everything. Family home, any sense of who I was supposed to be. He looked up, meeting her eyes directly. This club didn't just give me a place to belong, Emily. It gave me a reason to get back up every single time life knocked me down. That's what we're offering you right now. Not just protection, a reason to keep standing even when everything feels impossible. Emily's throat tightened, overwhelming gratitude and lingering grief tangling together in her chest. I don't know how to accept something this big, this life-changing. It feels like it should come with a catch, some price I haven't discovered yet. There's no catch, Jack said firmly. Only family. And Emily, whether you fully believe it yet or not, you and Grace are already part of ours. The next several days passed in a blur of careful, quiet vigilance. Griffin's people rotating through discreet shifts around the newly built house, watchful but unobtrusive, allowing Emily and Grace to settle into something resembling normalcy despite the danger looming at the edges of their new life. Grace started attending a nearby elementary school, escorted each morning by Donna, and returned each afternoon by Sarah, both women becoming fixtures in Grace's rapidly stabilizing world. Emily herself struggled with the strange, disorienting whiplash of finally having stability after months of desperate survival, the guilt of accepting so much help, warring constantly against the simple relief of watching her daughter sleep soundly in a warm bed each night instead of shivering in the back of a dying car. 5 days after the house's impossible construction, Foster returned his expression carrying a gravity that immediately set Emily's nerves on edge. "We've got a problem," he said without preamble, settling heavily into a kitchen chair across from Emily and Griffin. "What kind of problem?" Griffin asked. "Cole's lawyers filed an emergency injunction this morning, claiming the evidence obtained from Daniel Carter's belongings was improperly seized, demanding it be excluded from any potential case." Foster rubbed a hand across his tired face. "It's a stretch, legally speaking, but if a judge grants it, we lose our strongest piece of evidence." "Can they actually win that?" Emily asked, panic creeping back into her voice. "Depends on the judge," Foster admitted. "And unfortunately, Cole's got a history of contributing heavily to certain judicial campaigns in this county. So he's got the police in his pocket and now potentially a judge too," Jack said grimly. "How deep does this corruption actually go?" "Deeper than any of us initially realized," Foster admitted, "which is exactly why we need more than just Daniel's documents. We need additional evidence, ideally from an independent source, something that can't be excluded on procedural technicalities." "What kind of evidence?" Griffin asked. Foster hesitated before answering. "There's a woman, Rachel Simmons, worked as an inspector on the Whitmore project before she quietly resigned about 8 months ago. My gut tells me she knows exactly what happened, maybe even witnessed some of the falsification directly. But she's been ghosting every attempt we've made to contact her." "Scared?" Jack asked. "Terrified, probably," Foster said, "which means she's not going to trust an FBI badge showing up at her door. But she might trust someone with a more personal connection to this case." His eyes moved deliberately toward Emily, and understanding dawned slowly, uncomfortably across her exhausted features. "You want me to talk to her," Emily said. "I think you might be the only person who could get her to open up," Foster admitted. "A grieving widow whose husband died trying to expose the same corruption she witnessed firsthand, that's a connection that might actually break through the fear." "Absolutely not," Jack said immediately, his voice sharp with protective urgency. "Emily's already a target. Sending her out to make direct contact with a witness in an active corruption case is exactly the kind of exposure we've been trying to avoid." "I understand the risk," Foster said, "but without Rachel Simmons' testimony, this case might collapse entirely, and Victor Cole walks away completely untouched, free to keep cutting corners, free to keep endangering lives for profit." Emily sat in tense silence, weighing the fear pounding through her chest against the memory of Daniel's frantic, desperate handwriting scrawled across those falsified reports against 3 maintenance workers who died because nobody had stopped Victor Cole in time. "I'll do it," Emily said quietly. "Emily," Jack started. "No," Emily said, cutting him off, her voice gaining strength as resolve settled firmly into place. "Daniel died trying to stop this man. I'm not going to sit safely in this house he never got to see while Victor Cole gets away with it because everyone was too scared to finish what my husband started." Griffin studied her carefully for a long moment. "If we do this, it's on our terms. Full protection detail every step of the way. Nobody goes anywhere near Rachel Simmons without at least 4 of our people within immediate reach." "Agreed," Foster said. Jack's jaw remained tight, worry etched deeply across his features, but he nodded slowly, recognizing the futility of arguing against Emily's resolve once it had fully settled. "Then I'm coming too, every step." Rachel Simmons lived in a modest apartment complex on the outskirts of the city, and when Emily finally knocked on her door 2 days later, flanked discreetly by Jack and 2 other club members positioned nearby, she half expected no answer at all. The door opened only a few inches, security chain still fastened, revealing a thin, exhausted-looking woman in her 30s, eyes darting nervously past Emily toward the hallway beyond. "I don't know you," Rachel said, voice tight with suspicion. "My name is Emily Carter," Emily said gently. "My husband was Daniel Carter. He was a foreman on the Whitmore Tower project." Rachel's face went pale, her grip on the door tightening visibly. "I don't know anything about that. He died 3 years ago," Emily continued, refusing to let the door close despite Rachel's obvious fear. "I found his notes recently, structural reports, photographs of steel beams that didn't meet code." Emily's voice cracked slightly. "I think Victor Cole had him killed to keep it quiet, and I think you might know something about why." Rachel's eyes filled suddenly with tears, years of suppressed guilt and fear breaking visibly across her exhausted features. "I told them," she whispered. "I told them the steel wasn't right. I documented everything, and then somebody from Cole's office visited my apartment, and after that visit, I signed off on everything they told me to sign. I've hated myself every single day since." "Rachel," Emily said softly, 3 people died in that garage collapse. My husband might have died trying to stop it before that ever happened. Please, help me make sure nobody else has to die because we were all too scared to speak up." Rachel's hands trembled violently as she finally unlatched the security chain, opening the door, fully tears streaming freely down her face. "I have copies," she whispered. "Hidden ones. The real inspection reports before Cole's people made me change them. I was too scared to destroy them and too scared to ever use them." "You don't have to be scared anymore," Jack said quietly from behind Emily. "Not with us standing here." Rachel disappeared briefly into her apartment, returning moments later with a small, fireproof lockbox, hands still shaking as she handed it over to Emily. "It's all in there. Everything. Dates, signatures, the original reports before anything got altered." Emily accepted the box with trembling hands, overwhelming relief and validation washing through her chest. "Thank you, Rachel. Thank you so much." "Just promise me something," Rachel said, wiping tears from her cheeks. "Promise me this actually ends with him behind bars, not just another cover-up, not another accident that gets quietly buried." "I promise," Emily said firmly, "this ends with justice for everyone Victor Cole's hurt, including my husband." As they made their way back toward the waiting vehicle, the fireproof box secured carefully in Emily's arms, Jack's phone buzzed sharply with an incoming call. He answered immediately, his expression shifting rapidly from relief to alarm as he listened. "When?" he demanded. "How many?" Emily's stomach twisted with sudden dread. "What is it? What's wrong?" Jack ended the call, his face pale despite the winter cold. "That was Griffin. Somebody just tried to break into your house, Emily. 20 minutes ago." Emily's blood ran cold. Grace was there with Donna. "They're both safe," Jack said quickly, already moving her toward the car with urgent haste. "Donna got them out the second the alarm triggered, but Emily, whoever it was, they knew exactly which house to hit. They knew exactly when your protection detail would be thinnest. Which means somebody's been watching us this whole time." Emily whispered, horror creeping through her chest. "Somebody knew we'd be gone." "Get in the car," Jack said, his voice hard with barely controlled fury. We need to get you somewhere secure immediately, and then we need to figure out exactly how deep this leak goes. As the car sped through the freezing city streets, Emily clutched the fireproof box tightly against her chest. Rachel's testimony finally within reach. Daniel's murder, finally within grasp of justice, and yet the danger surrounding her and Grace had never felt more immediate, more terrifyingly close. Jack, Emily said quietly, staring out at the passing streets. How did they know? How did Victor Cole's people know exactly when to strike? Jack's jaw tightened, his eyes hard and calculating in the rearview mirror. That's exactly what I intend to find out. Because somebody close to this operation just handed Victor Cole a roadmap straight to your daughter. Griffin was waiting in the driveway when the car pulled up, his face carved from stone, Donna standing beside him. With Grace wrapped tight in her arms, the little girl's cheeks streaked with dried tears. Mama! Grace broke free the instant she saw Emily sprinting across the frozen grass, and Emily dropped to her knees, catching her daughter in a desperate embrace, burying her face in Grace's hair. I'm here, baby. I'm here. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. There were bad men, Mama, Grace whispered against her shoulder. Donna made me hide in the closet. I was scared. Emily's arms tightened, rage and terror and guilt colliding violently in her chest. You did so good, sweetheart. You did exactly right. Donna knelt beside them, her own hands still trembling faintly despite her efforts to stay composed. Two men came around back, tried the kitchen door first. The second the motion sensor triggered, I had her in the closet and Marcus and Reyes were already moving. Whole thing lasted maybe 90 seconds before they ran. Did anyone see their faces? Jack asked, his voice tight. Marcus got a partial look at one of them, Griffin said. Enough for a description, not enough for an ID. But Jack, he hesitated, glancing at Emily before continuing. They weren't amateurs. They knew exactly where the cameras were blind. They knew the timing of the shift change almost to the minute. Emily's blood went cold all over again. That's not luck. That's not a coincidence. No, Griffin agreed grimly. It's not. Inside, once Grace had been settled with hot cocoa and a cartoon on the television volume low. Donna sitting close beside her, the adults gathered around the kitchen table, the fireproof box containing Rachel Simmons' evidence sitting heavy and significant in the center. Somebody inside this operation is talking. Jack said, his voice flat and hard. There's no other explanation. Cole's people didn't guess the shift change. They knew it. You're saying one of ours sold us out, Griffin said, and the words seemed to cost him physically, his jaw tight with barely restrained fury. I'm saying somebody knows details that only a handful of people had access to, Jack said. Think about it. Who knew Emily and I would be out today? Who knew the exact protection rotation? The silence that followed was heavy, uncomfortable, each person at the table running through mental lists of trusted faces searching for the crack none of them wanted to find. Foster knew, Emily said quietly. He's the one who set up the meeting with Rachel. Foster's clean, Griffin said immediately. Man's been building this case for 18 months. He's got more to lose from a leak than any of us. I'm not accusing him, Emily said. I'm just saying he's one of the people who knew. Jack rubbed a hand across his face, exhaustion and frustration etched deep into every line. There's another possibility. Cole's people could have had someone watching the house directly. Old-fashioned surveillance, no leak required. For how long? Sarah asked, arms crossed tightly over her chest. Long enough to map out shift rotations. That's not a stakeout, that's a full operation. Which means Cole's got more resources dedicated to this than any of us initially estimated, Griffin said grimly. Foster arrived within the hour, alerted by Griffin's call, his expression darkening further as he reviewed the details of the attempted break-in. He examined the fireproof box Rachel had provided with careful gloved hands, cataloging its contents with methodical precision, despite the tension crackling through the room. This is good, Foster said, finally closing the box carefully. Really good. Combined with Daniel's original documents, this gives us enough to move on an emergency warrant for Cole's financial records. But I need to say something, and I need everyone in this room to hear it clearly. Say it, Griffin said. If Cole's people knew about today's schedule, that means one of two things. Either there's a leak somewhere close to this operation, or Cole has significantly more surveillance capability than we accounted for. Foster's eyes swept the room. Either way, we need to assume every conversation from this point forward could be compromised. No more discussing details of the investigation inside this house over these phones or with anyone outside this room. You think our phones are tapped? Jack asked sharply. I think we can't rule it out, Foster said. Cole's got money and money buys access to equipment that shouldn't exist outside federal agencies. Until I can get everyone's devices swept, I want radio silence on anything sensitive. Emily sat quietly through the exchange, her arms wrapped around herself, watching grown men and women who commanded absolute fearlessness in every other context suddenly speaking in hushed, careful tones about surveillance and leaks and enemies who might be listening from anywhere. I want to ask something, Emily said, and every eye turned toward her. If Cole's people are willing to send men to my house in broad daylight twice now, what's stopping them from just escalating? What's stopping this from getting so much worse before Foster's case is even ready? Nobody answered immediately, and the silence itself was its own devastating confirmation. Nothing. Jack finally said, his voice quiet but honest. Nothing's stopping that possibility, Emily, which is exactly why we need to move faster than we have been. How much faster can we move? Griffin asked Foster directly. Realistically. Foster considered the question carefully. With Rachel's testimony and Daniel's original documents, I think I can get an emergency warrant application in front of a judge within 48 hours. If it's granted, we freeze Cole's assets, seize his financial records, and hopefully find enough to justify an arrest before he can destroy anything else or hurt anyone else. 48 hours, Emily repeated. That's 2 more nights we're just sitting here hoping he doesn't send someone smarter next time. I know it's not what you want to hear, Foster said, but rushing a warrant application on flimsy grounds gets it thrown out by a judge who's already inclined to favor Cole. We do this right or we don't do it at all. Emily's fist clenched in her lap, frustration and fear boiling together into something close to fury. My husband died trying to expose this man. 3 workers died in that garage collapse, and now somebody's tried twice to hurt my daughter. How much more evidence does anyone need? None, Foster said gently. The evidence isn't the problem anymore, Emily. The problem is making sure it survives contact with the Cole's lawyers, his judge, and whatever other corruption he's bought himself over the years. We move carefully or we lose this entirely. Griffin's phone buzzed sharply against the table, and he glanced at the screen, his expression shifting instantly into something harder, more alert. It's Marcus. He answered, listening in tense silence for nearly a full minute before speaking. Where? A pause. How sure are you? Another pause longer this time. Stay on him, don't engage unless he moves toward the house. He ended the call and every eye in the room fixed on him waiting. Marcus spotted a vehicle, Griffin said slowly. Parked 2 blocks from here, been sitting there for the last 3 hours. Same make and model as the one that ran Jack off the road. Emily's stomach dropped. They're watching us right now. Looks that way, Griffin confirmed grimly. I want eyes on that vehicle, Jack said immediately, already rising from his chair. If we can get a plate, get a face. Marcus already has both, Griffin said. Running the plate now. But Jack, I need you to think clearly here, not react. If we move on that vehicle aggressively, we tip Cole off that we know he's watching. Right now, that's actually working in our favor. He thinks he's got the advantage of surprise. He tried to break into my house with my daughter inside, Jack snapped. I'm not interested in playing patient games while he sits out there planning his next move. I understand, Griffin said, his voice carrying the calm authority of a man who'd navigated far worse crises than this. But losing our composure now doesn't protect Emily or Grace. It just gives Cole more ammunition to use against us. Emily watched the exchange with growing unease, the weight of everything crashing down at once. 3 years of unanswered questions about Daniel's death colliding violently with the sudden, immediate danger circling her daughter's new home. I need to see Grace, Emily said abruptly, rising from the table. She found her daughter curled against Donna's side on the couch, eyes heavy with exhaustion, despite her efforts to stay awake for the cartoon flickering across the screen. Emily sank down beside them, pulling Grace gently into her lap. Mama, Grace mumbled sleepily. Are the bad men gonna come back? Emily's heart clenched painfully. No, baby, not while all these people are here to protect us. Promise. The question hit Emily like a physical blow. The impossible weight of a promise she couldn't fully guarantee pressing hard against her chest, but looking down at her daughter's exhausted, trusting face, she found the only answer that mattered. I promise, Emily whispered, and prayed she wasn't lying. Night fell heavy and tense over the house, the usual warmth of the newly built home replaced by a watchful, coiled alertness that seemed to seep into every corner. Griffin doubled the protection detail, positioning members at every entry point, motion sensors activated across the entire property, floodlights installed hastily along the perimeter fence that hadn't existed the day before. Emily lay awake long after Grace had finally drifted into uneasy sleep, beside her, refusing to let her daughter sleep alone in the purple bedroom that had brought such joy only days earlier. Every creak of the house settling, every distant sound from outside sent fresh spikes of adrenaline through her exhausted body. Around midnight, a soft knock sounded at her door. Emily eased out of bed, carefully checking that Grace remained asleep before opening it to find Jack standing in the hallway, still fully dressed, clearly having not slept at all. "Everything okay?" Emily whispered. "Wanted to check on you," Jack said quietly. "Figured you probably weren't sleeping either." Emily stepped into the hallway, pulling the door mostly closed behind her. "How could I sleep? Every sound makes me think they're coming back." "They're not getting anywhere near this house tonight," Jack said, his voice carrying quiet certainty. "I promise you that." "You can't actually promise that," Emily said, exhaustion stripping away her usual careful composure. "Nobody can promise that, not really." Jack was quiet for a long moment, his eyes carrying something raw and honest. "You're right. I can't promise the world won't try to hurt you again, but I can promise that as long as I'm breathing, nobody gets past me to reach you or Grace. That's a promise I can actually keep." Something in his voice, steady and absolute, eased some of the panic clawing at Emily's chest, if only slightly. "Why do you care this much? I gave you soup, Jack." "That's it. That's all this was supposed to be." "That's not all it was," Jack said quietly. "You want to know something? 3 years ago, before any of this, I was in a dark place. Real dark. Lost my wife to cancer, lost my sense of purpose, right along with her started drinking myself into an early grave because I couldn't figure out how to keep living without her." His eyes met Emily's directly. "This club pulled me back from that edge, gave me something to fight for again. And then I ended up bleeding out under an overpass, and a woman with absolutely nothing left to give gave me everything anyway." His voice cracked slightly. "You reminded me what it actually looks like to choose compassion, even when the whole world's given you every reason not to. I'm not going to let anything happen to the person who reminded me of that." Emily's throat tightened, unexpected tears pricking at her eyes. "I'm sorry about your wife." "Long time ago now," Jack said softly. "Doesn't mean it doesn't still hurt some days. But that's not why I'm telling you this. I'm telling you because I need you to understand that this isn't charity and it isn't obligation. It's family. And family doesn't walk away when things get dangerous." Before Emily could respond, a sharp crackle burst from the radio clipped to Jack's belt, Marcus's voice cutting through, tense and urgent. "Movement at the north perimeter. 2 individuals approaching on foot." Jack's entire demeanor shifted instantly, warmth replaced by hard, focused readiness. "Stay here, lock the door behind me." "Jack." "Emily, I need you with Grace right now, door locked, and I need you to trust me." She nodded, throat too tight for words, and watched him disappear down the hallway, already reaching for something holstered beneath his jacket. Emily rushed back into the bedroom, locking the door behind her, gathering Grace's sleeping form protectively against her chest. "Mama." Grace stirred, sensing the sudden tension. "What's happening?" "Shh, baby. Everything's okay. Just stay close to me." Outside, muffled shouts and the sound of rapid footfall echoed through the house, and Emily's heart hammered violently as she strained to make sense of the chaos unfolding beyond her locked door. A crash, a shout, then terrifyingly silence. Minutes stretched into an eternity before a soft knock finally sounded at her door. "Emily, it's Griffin. It's safe now." She unlocked the door with trembling hands, finding Griffin's expression grim but controlled. "What happened? Is everyone okay?" "Everyone's fine," Griffin confirmed. "We caught both of them before they got within 50 yards of the house." "Caught them, you mean?" "They're secured," Griffin said carefully. "Foster's on his way to take them into custody. But Emily, this changes things significantly." "How?" Griffin hesitated, something heavy in his expression. "One of them talked. Panicked the second Marcus had him pinned. Gave up more information than I think Cole would have wanted." "What kind of information?" "Cole's not just trying to intimidate you into silence anymore," Griffin said grimly. Tonight's attempt wasn't about scaring you off. It was about eliminating the problem entirely. Both you and Grace. The words hit Emily like ice water, the full terrifying weight of just how far Victor Cole was willing to go, finally crystallizing into horrifying clarity. He wants us dead, Emily whispered. Wanted, Griffin corrected firmly. Past tense. Because we caught them before they got anywhere close, and everything that man just confessed is going to land directly in Foster's case file within the hour. Foster arrived within 20 minutes, his expression a complex mixture of alarm and grim satisfaction as he took the two captured men into custody, their statements already providing exactly the kind of direct evidence his investigation had been missing. This is it, Foster said, reviewing his notes with barely restrained excitement despite the late hour. Direct testimony connecting Cole to attempted murder on top of everything else we already have. This isn't just enough for an emergency warrant anymore, Emily. This is enough to take him down completely. When, Emily asked, exhaustion and desperate hope warring in her voice. I can have an arrest warrant in front of a judge by morning, Foster said. With this level of evidence, even a judge sympathetic to Cole isn't going to have grounds to deny it. Relief flooded through Emily so intensely her knees nearly buckled, Jack's steady hand catching her elbow before she could stumble. It's actually going to be over. Almost, Foster cautioned. We still need to execute the arrest cleanly, make sure Cole doesn't get advance warning and try to flee or destroy remaining evidence. Between now and morning, everyone needs to stay exactly as vigilant as tonight. Griffin nodded firmly. Understood. We hold the line until sunrise. The remaining hours of darkness passed in tense, watchful silence, the household settling into an uneasy vigil, every member of the club rotating through careful shifts around the property's perimeter. Emily sat awake beside Grace's bed long after her daughter had finally drifted back to sleep, watching the small, peaceful rise and fall of her breathing, unable to fully release the tension coiled through her body despite Foster's reassurances. Jack found her there sometime past 3 a.m, settling quietly into the doorway without intruding further into the room. You should try to sleep, he said softly. I can't, Emily admitted. Not until this is actually over. Not until I know for certain Victor Cole can't hurt her anymore. By tomorrow, Jack said, he won't be able to hurt anyone anymore. You really believe that? I believe Foster's got enough evidence now to bury that man completely, Jack said. Between Daniel's documents, Rachel's testimony, and tonight's confession, there's no version of this that ends with Cole walking free. Emily was quiet for a long moment, watching her daughter sleep the weight of everything the last week had brought crashing over her in exhausted waves. Daniel would be so relieved, knowing this is finally going to come out, knowing those workers who died didn't die for nothing. He'd be proud of you too, Jack said gently, for finishing what he started, for being brave enough to go to Rachel to trust people you'd never met before to fight for justice, even when it put you and Grace directly in danger. I didn't feel brave, Emily admitted. I felt terrified the entire time. That's exactly what brave actually looks like, Jack said. Not the absence of fear, just refusing to let it stop you anyway. Dawn broke gray and quiet over the house, the tension of the long night finally beginning to ease as morning light spilled softly across the frozen yard. Foster called shortly after 7, his voice carrying an urgency that immediately snapped Emily's exhausted attention back into sharp focus. Judge signed the warrant 20 minutes ago, Foster said, and Emily could hear the barely contained triumph in his voice. We're moving on Cole's office right now, full tactical team, financial forensics unit, standing by. Is it really happening? Emily breathed. It's really happening, Foster confirmed. Emily, because of you, because of Daniel's documents and Rachel's courage and everything that's happened this past week, Victor Cole is about to lose everything. Emily's hand pressed against her mouth, overwhelming emotion crashing through her chest. 3 years of grief and uncertainty finally beginning to find their resolution. Thank you for believing this case mattered enough to fight for. Thank Daniel, Foster said quietly. He's the one who started all this, even if he never got to see it finished. I'll call the second we have him in custody. The wait that followed stretched agonizingly long, every minute crawling past as Emily paced the kitchen, Grace watching cartoons obliviously in the next room, unaware of just how close the danger circling their new home had come to catching them entirely. Around 9 that morning, Foster's call finally came through, and Griffin answered on speaker, the entire household gathering close to hear the news. "We got him," Foster said, and even through the phone, Emily could hear the exhaustion and satisfaction tangled together in his voice. "Victor Cole is in federal custody. Financial records, seized offices, searched, and preliminary evidence already confirming everything Daniel documented 3 years ago." The kitchen erupted into stunned, overwhelming relief, Sarah wrapping Emily into a fierce hug, Griffin's shoulders finally relaxing after days of tension, Jack watching Emily with an expression that carried something deep and unspoken. "It's over," Emily whispered, tears finally breaking free, 3 years of buried grief, and a week of terrifying danger finally releasing all at once. "It's actually over." "Not entirely," Foster cautioned gently. "There's still a trial ahead, still work to be done to make sure this conviction sticks. But Emily, the most dangerous part, the part where he could still hurt you or Grace directly, that's finished. Cole's not getting bail on charges this serious. He's not getting anywhere near either of you again." Grace wandered into the kitchen, drawn by the sudden commotion, confusion crossing her small face at the sight of adults crying and hugging in what should have been an ordinary morning. "Mama, what's happening? Why's everybody crying?" Emily knelt down, pulling her daughter close, overwhelming relief and love flooding through every word. "Good things, baby. Really, really good things. We're safe now, completely safe. Forever." Grace asked, her small voice carrying the simple, uncomplicated hope of a child finally allowed to believe in something stable. Emily looked up, meeting Jack's eyes across the kitchen, finding in his steady, warm gaze a promise that extended far beyond the danger that had finally passed. "Forever," Emily said softly, and for the first time since that freezing night beneath the overpass, she allowed herself to fully believe it. But even as relief settled warm and real through the kitchen, Emily's mind drifted back to Griffin's words from days earlier, still unanswered, still hanging heavy in the air. Somebody close to this operation had known about the shift change. Somebody had handed Cole's people a roadmap straight to her daughter. And as the celebration continued around her, Emily's eyes found Griffin's across the room. Both of them carrying the same unspoken question neither had yet found the courage to voice aloud. If Victor Cole was truly behind bars, who exactly had been feeding him information from the inside? Griffin waited until the celebration had quieted, until Grace had been coaxed back to her cartoons by Donna, before he pulled Jack and Foster aside, his voice dropping low enough that only the three of them and Emily, who refused to be excluded, could hear. "We still have a problem," Griffin said. "Cole's in custody. That doesn't answer who tipped off his people about our protection rotation." Foster's expression sobered instantly, the triumph of the arrest giving way to renewed unease. "You're right. I got so focused on making the case airtight, I let that thread go slack. That's on me." "It's on whoever sold us out," Jack said grimly. "Not you." Emily wrapped her arms tighter around herself, the warmth of relief from moments earlier already cooling into something colder, more watchful. "If Cole's locked up, does it even matter anymore? The danger's over, isn't it? Cole's not the only person who benefited from a leak like that," Griffin said carefully. "If somebody inside this operation was willing to sell information once for the right price, they might still be a problem warrant or no warrant. I want to know who it was. Not just for our peace of mind, for everyone's safety going forward." Foster pulled out his phone, scrolling through something with a tight frown. "I can check my own end. Financial records, phone logs, anyone on my task force who had access to the schedule." "I'll check ours," Griffin said. "Every single person who knew the protection rotation that day." The investigation moved quietly over the following 2 days, careful and methodical, while the household outside maintained the appearance of settling into ordinary life. Grace returned to school. Emily allowed herself cautiously to imagine a future that didn't revolve entirely around danger and grief. But beneath the surface, Griffin worked with quiet, relentless focus, cross-referencing schedules, phone records, bank deposits, anything that might expose the crack in their armor. It was Sarah who found it unexpectedly, while helping Donna sort through supply receipts from the night of the house build. "Griffin," Sarah's voice carried a tightness that immediately drew every eye in the kitchen toward her. "I need you to look at something." She held out her phone, a bank notification displayed on the screen, a transfer of $8,000 into an account belonging to someone Emily didn't recognize by name, but whose face, when Sarah pulled up a photo, made her blood run instantly cold. "That's Doyle," Emily said, staring at the image. "The building inspector. The one who almost shut down the construction that night." Deposit came through 11 hours before the break-in attempt, Sarah said quietly. Traced back through 3 shell accounts, but it lands on Cole's construction firm eventually. Took some digging, but it's there. Jack's jaw tightened into something hard and dangerous. Doyle knew the address. Doyle was standing right there when Griffin explained the entire situation. If Cole reached out to him after that visit, he'd know exactly where to send people, Griffin finished grimly. And Doyle, as a city employee, would have had access to the property's utility schedules, security company vendor information, everything needed to map out patrol rotations without ever setting foot back on the property himself. Emily's stomach twisted violently. He stood right in front of me. He looked me in the eye and let this happen anyway. For $8,000. We need to get this to Foster immediately, Griffin said, already reaching for his phone. This isn't just a break-in charge anymore. This is a city official taking bribes to facilitate an attempted murder. Foster arrived within the hour, reviewing Sarah's discovery with the same careful, methodical focus he'd applied to every piece of evidence throughout the investigation. His expression darkened progressively as the financial trail unfolded before him. This is exactly what we needed, Foster said finally. Not just for Doyle. This gives us grounds to expand the investigation into every inspector Cole's had in his pocket over the years. If Doyle took $8,000 to look the other way on your house, imagine what he's been paid to look the other way on for actual commercial construction projects. The Whitmore Tower, Emily said slowly, horror creeping through her voice. You think Doyle was involved in signing off on that too? I think, Foster said, we're about to find out exactly how many buildings in this city have Victor Cole's fingerprints buried inside their foundations. Doyle's arrest came 3 days later, executed quietly at his home, before dawn, the same careful precision that had marked every step of Foster's investigation from the beginning. When Griffin called with the news, Emily felt something in her chest finally truly begin to unclench for the first time since Jack's crash beneath the overpass weeks earlier. He's talking, Foster told them that evening, gathered once more around the kitchen table that had become the unofficial command center of an investigation none of them had asked to be part of. Doyle's cooperating, fully hoping it reduces his sentence. Says Cole's people approached him the same night as your house build, offered him money to look the other way on the permits, then came back a second time, asking for information about your protection schedule. Did he know what they planned to do with that information? Emily asked, her voice tight. Foster hesitated, then answered honestly. He says he didn't know for certain, but he suspected it wasn't good and he took the money anyway. Emily's hands clenched into fists against the table. That's not an excuse. No, Foster agreed, it's not, and it won't hold up as one in court either. Between his testimony and the financial evidence, Doyle's looking at conspiracy charges on top of the bribery. He's not walking away from this clean, regardless of how much he cooperates. Griffin leaned back in his chair, exhaustion and quiet satisfaction mingling across his weathered features. So that's it then. The leak's identified. Cole's in custody. Doyle's cooperating. This is actually finished. Almost. Foster said, a faint, genuine smile finally breaking through his usual careful composure. Grand jury convenes next week. With everything we've assembled, Daniel's original documents, Rachel's testimony, Doyle's cooperation, the financial trail connecting all of it back to Cole, I don't think there's a defense attorney alive who could unravel this case. What happens to Cole? Emily asked quietly. Multiple counts of bribery, falsifying safety documentation, and given the connection we've established to the garage collapse that killed 3 workers, we're pursuing manslaughter charges as well. Foster's eyes met Emily's directly. And with the attempted murder charges from the break-in combined with everything tied to your husband's death, Emily Victor Cole is looking at spending the rest of his life in prison. The words settled over Emily slowly, 3 years of grief and unanswered questions finally truly beginning to find resolution. She thought of Daniel, his frantic handwriting scrawled across those falsified reports, the fear he must have carried in those final weeks, wondering if anyone would ever believe him, wondering if his warnings would die with him beneath the wreckage of a car accident that had never been an accident at all. He'll never build another building, Emily whispered. Never cut another corner, never gamble with anyone else's life for profit again. No, Foster confirmed gently. He won't. Grace wandered into the kitchen. Just as the weight of the moment settled fully over the room, drawn by some instinctive child sense that something important had just happened. She climbed into Emily's lap without a word, and Emily held her close, feeling the small, steady rhythm of her daughter's heartbeat against her own chest. "Is it really over now, Mama?" Grace asked quietly, echoing the question she'd asked days earlier, only this time carrying a certainty that hadn't existed before. Emily looked around the kitchen at Griffin's steady presence, at Sarah's quiet strength, at Foster's exhausted but genuine relief, at Jack watching her with an expression that carried something deeper than simple protectiveness. "It's really over, baby," Emily said, and for the first time she said it with absolute unwavering certainty. The weeks that followed unfolded with a gentleness Emily had almost forgotten was possible. Grace thrived in school, her nightmares of bad men gradually fading into ordinary childhood concerns, whether she'd get invited to a classmate's birthday party, whether her purple room needed more stars on the ceiling. Emily found work at a local medical clinic, her half-finished nursing training finally given the chance to matter again. The clinic's director moved by her story and impressed by the natural competence that had never truly left her, even through the darkest months of homelessness. Jack remained a steady, constant presence in their lives, not overbearing, never pushing, simply there showing up for Grace's school events, fixing things around the house before Emily even noticed they were broken, sitting with her on quiet evenings, when grief for Daniel still surfaced unexpectedly, allowing space for both mourning and healing to exist together without contradiction. "You don't have to keep doing this," Emily told him one evening, several weeks after Cole's arrest, watching him repair a loose porch railing that had shifted slightly in a recent storm. "Doing what?" Jack asked, not looking up from his work. "Showing up, taking care of things. You've already given us everything. You don't owe us anything more." Jack set down his tools, turning to face her fully, something serious and unguarded in his expression. "Emily, I need you to understand something. I'm not here because I owe you a debt. I paid that debt weeks ago the night this house went up. I'm here because somewhere between that first night under the overpass and now I stopped thinking of you and Grace as people I needed to protect out of obligation." He paused, searching for the right words. "I started thinking of you as people I wanted in my life, not because I have to be here, because I want to be." Emily's breath caught, unexpected emotion rising sharply in her chest. "Jack, you don't have to say anything back," Jack said quickly, gently. "I just needed you to know that. Whatever happens next, whatever you decide, I needed you to understand the difference between duty and choice. This stopped being duty a long time ago." Emily said nothing for a long moment, watching the man who had once been a dying stranger, bleeding out in the back of her broken car, now standing in the golden light of her front porch, offering her something she hadn't allowed herself to hope for in longer than she could remember. "I'm not ready," she finally admitted, honest and raw. "Not yet. There's still so much healing left to do, for Grace, for me." "I know," Jack said softly. "I'm not asking you to be ready. I'm just asking you to know that I'll still be here whenever you are." 3 months after Victor Cole's arrest, the trial finally began drawing significant media attention as the full scope of his corruption came to light. Reporters descended on the courthouse daily, the story of falsified safety inspections, bribed officials, and a construction empire built on cut corners and buried bodies capturing headlines across the state. Emily testified on the second day, her voice steady despite the overwhelming weight of finally speaking Daniel's truth in a courtroom filled with strangers. "My husband tried to warn people." Emily told the jury, her eyes finding Daniel's old photograph she'd brought with her resting quietly on the prosecution's table. He documented everything he found, every falsified report, every corner cut for profit. And 3 weeks after he started asking questions, he was dead. Ruled an accident. Nobody investigated further because nobody had any reason to suspect otherwise. Her voice cracked slightly, then steadied. 3 years later, 3 maintenance workers died in a parking garage, collapse that never should have happened, in a building my husband specifically warned would fail exactly the way it did. Victor Cole sat motionless at the defense table throughout her testimony, his expensive suit and composed expression doing nothing to disguise the cold calculation Emily recognized instantly from every falsified document she had read, every life he'd been willing to gamble for profit. "Mrs. Carter," the prosecutor asked gently, "what happened when you discovered your husband's original documents weeks ago after years of believing his death was simply a tragic accident?" Emily's eyes found Jack's in the courtroom gallery, steady and encouraging before she answered. "I learned the truth, that my husband didn't die by accident. that he'd done it trying to protect people he'd never even met, trying to stop a man who valued profit over human lives. She turned in meeting Cole's cold, unreadable gaze directly for the first time, and I decided that no matter what it cost me, I was going to finish what he started. The trial stretched across nearly 3 weeks, witness after witness building an overwhelming, irrefutable case against Victor Cole's decade of systematic corruption. Rachel Simmons testified with quiet, hard-won courage about the pressure she'd faced to falsify reports. Doyle, testifying as part of his plea agreement, detailed the bribes, the threats, the careful web of corruption Cole had built across multiple city departments. Foster presented the financial evidence methodically, each piece building toward an inescapable conclusion. When the jury finally returned their verdict guilty on every count, manslaughter, bribery, falsifying safety documentation, conspiracy, attempted murder, the courtroom erupted into a wave of emotion. Emily felt reverberate through her entire body. Cole's expression finally cracked disbelief and fury, replacing his careful composure, as the reality of his sentence, life in prison without possibility of parole, settled fully over the courtroom. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, cameras, flashing microphones thrust toward Emily as she emerged into the afternoon sunlight, Jack's steady presence at her side, Griffin and Sarah close behind. "Mrs. Carter," one reporter called out, "how does it feel finally getting justice for your husband after 3 years?" Emily paused, considering the question carefully, feeling the weight of everything that had led to this exact moment. "It doesn't bring Daniel back," she said honestly. "It doesn't erase 3 years of not knowing the truth, or the months my daughter and I spent homeless, or the workers who died before anyone stopped this man." She glanced back at Jack, then at Griffin, gratitude swelling fiercely in her chest. "But it means his death mattered. It means the truth he died trying to expose finally came to light. And it means nobody else has to die because Victor Cole decided their lives were worth less than his profit margins. There are reports that a motorcycle club was instrumental in uncovering this evidence," another reporter pressed. "Can you comment on their involvement to Mom?" "Yeah, my mom." Emily's eyes found Jack's warmth and gratitude flooding through her voice as she answered. "The Hells Angels saved my life, not just once, but over and over in ways I never could have imagined possible. They gave my daughter and me a home when we had nothing. They protected us when Cole's people tried to hurt us, and they never once asked for anything in return." She paused, emotion thickening her words. "Everything people think they know about that club, the fear, the assumptions, none of it prepared me for what I actually found. Family, loyalty, people who show up when it matters most, no matter the cost." That evening, the club gathered at Emily's home for a celebration that stretched long into the night, the weight of months of danger and uncertainty finally lifting into genuine, unrestrained joy. Grace ran between the adults with unrestrained delight, finally free of the fear that had shadowed her small life for far too long. Griffin raised a glass as the celebration reached its peak, calling for quiet among the gathered crowd of club members who had become in every way that mattered Emily's family. 6 months ago, he said, his voice carrying easily through the crowded living room, a woman gave a dying stranger the last meal she had to offer her own daughter. She had every reason in the world to walk past that wreck, to protect what little she had left, to choose survival over compassion. His eyes found Emily's warm and proud. Instead, she chose to save a life, even though it cost her everything she had left to give. The room fell into respectful silence, every eye turning toward Emily, who felt her cheeks flush with unexpected emotion. That single choice, Griffin continued, set into motion everything that's happened since. Justice for her husband. Justice for 3 workers who died because of one man's greed. A home for a family that deserves so much more than the world had given them. He raised his glass higher. "Emily Carter, on behalf of this entire club, I want you to know something important. You didn't just save Jack's life that night. You reminded every single one of us exactly why this brotherhood exists in the first place. Not fear, not violence, family, loyalty. Showing up for people the rest of the world has given up on." Emily's eyes filled with tears as the room erupted into cheers. Dozens of leather-clad bikers raising their glasses in her honor, men and women who had once terrified her now standing as the closest thing to family she had left in the world. "To Emily Carter," Griffin said, his voice carrying absolute conviction. "And to Grace, welcome home, both of you, forever." As the celebration continued around her, Emily found herself slipping quietly onto the front porch, needing a moment alone to process the overwhelming weight of everything that had unfolded since that freezing night beneath the overpass. The winter cold had finally begun to give way to early spring, the air carrying just the faintest hint of warmth beneath its lingering chill. Jack found her there minutes later, settling quietly beside her on the porch steps without a word, simply offering his steady presence in the comfortable silence between them. "Quite a night," he finally said. "Quite a 6 months," Emily replied softly. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge slowly against the darkening sky, the sounds of celebration drifting quietly from inside the house behind them. "Can I ask you something?" Emily said finally. "Anything. That night under the overpass, when you asked me why I was helping you when I had nothing left to give." Emily turned to face him directly. "I never really answered that question honestly. Not completely." Jack studied her, carefully, patient, and unhurried. "What's the honest answer?" Emily considered her words carefully before speaking. "I think some part of me, even then exhausted and terrified and completely out of options, believed that if I gave up on kindness, if I let fear and desperation turn me into someone who only thought about survival, I'd lose something more important than food or shelter. I'd lose whoever I actually was underneath all of it." She paused, emotion thickening her voice. "Daniel used to say that the world doesn't need more people who survive. It needs more people who choose to be good even when it costs them everything." "He sounds like he was a good man," Jack said quietly. "He was," Emily said, smiling softly through unexpected tears. "And I think somehow some part of him would be really proud of everything that's happened since. Not just the justice, but this." She gestured toward the house behind them, toward the sounds of laughter and celebration drifting through the open windows. "This family we found because I chose compassion over fear that night." Jack reached over gently, taking her hand in his warmth and quiet certainty passing between them. "For what it's worth, Emily, I think you're exactly the kind of person this world desperately needs more of. Not because of what happened with Cole or the case or any of the danger you faced with such incredible courage." His eyes held hers steadily, "just because of who you fundamentally are. A woman who chooses kindness even when kindness costs her everything she has left." Emily's fingers tightened gently around his, something warm and hopeful, blooming slowly in her chest. 6 months of grief and fear and impossible strength, finally settling into something that felt, for the first time in longer than she could remember, genuinely peaceful. "I think I'm ready now," she said softly. Jack's expression shifted, understanding, dawning slowly. "Ready for what?" "For whatever comes next," Emily said, meeting his eyes with quiet, certain warmth. "For choosing to let myself be happy again. For letting you in completely, not just as protection or gratitude, but as something real." Jack's smile broke slowly across his weathered face, genuine and unguarded, in a way Emily hadn't seen from him before, not even in their most vulnerable moments. "Take all the time you need. I told you I'll be here whenever you're ready." "I know," Emily said. "That's exactly why I'm ready now." Inside the house, Grace's laughter rang out clear and unburdened, chasing after Donna's grandchildren through rooms that had once been nothing but ash and rubble, now filled with warmth, love, and the unshakable foundation of family Emily had never imagined possible 6 months earlier. A full year after that freezing night beneath the overpass, Emily stood in her kitchen, the soft yellow walls now decorated with Grace's artwork family photographs, small pieces of a life fully rebuilt from nothing but courage and compassion. On the counter beside her coffee maker sat a small brass plaque mounted carefully onto the dented tin soup pot that had started everything, the pot she'd used to save Jack's life on the worst night of her existence. The plaque read simply, "Compassion changes everything. Given freely, it returns tenfold." Grace, 7 years old now, burst into the kitchen backpack slung over her shoulder, ready for another ordinary day of school that no longer carried any shadow of fear or uncertainty. "Mama, Jack's here. He says he's taking me to school today." Emily smiled, watching her daughter's unrestrained joy, the easy trust and security that had become the foundation of Grace's entire world. "Tell him I said thank you." As Grace disappeared toward the front door, Emily allowed herself one final moment of quiet reflection, remembering the woman she'd been that freezing night, exhausted, terrified, believing she had absolutely nothing left to give the world. She thought of the choice she'd made in that single desperate moment, choosing compassion over fear, generosity over survival, instinct, kindness over the crushing weight of her own desperate circumstances. That single choice had rippled outward in ways she never could have imagined. It had brought justice for Daniel closure for 3 grieving families who'd lost loved ones to Cole's greed safety, for countless future construction workers who would never know how close they'd come to sharing the same fate. It had brought her a home, a community, a family built not from blood but from something even stronger, chosen a loyalty forged in the fires of shared struggle and unwavering compassion. Victor Cole would spend the remainder of his life in federal prison, stripped of his empire, his influence and every ounce of power he'd once wielded so carelessly over other people's lives. Doyle served his own sentence, a smaller but no less significant reckoning for the corruption he'd allowed to compromise his integrity. And somewhere in the quiet, ordinary moments of everyday life, Rachel Simmons finally slept peacefully again, freed from years of guilt and fear that had haunted her since the day she'd first been forced to sign her name to a lie. Emily Carter had walked into that freezing night with nothing left but a single can of soup and an unbreakable belief that kindness still mattered, even when the world offered every possible reason to abandon it. She emerged on the other side with everything that truly mattered, restored to her Justice family purpose, and a love she'd never expected to find again after losing Daniel. 500 motorcycles had once thundered beneath that frozen overpass, an army of leather and chrome descending upon a homeless mother and her daughter with an offer of protection neither of them had ever imagined possible. What began as a debt repaid had transformed slowly and completely into something far more profound, an unbreakable family bond that would last for the rest of their lives. Compassion chosen freely even in life's darkest, most desperate moments had changed absolutely everything. And in a world that so often rewards fear, selfishness, and survival at any cost, Emily Carter's story stood as undeniable proof that kindness, given without hesitation and without expectation of return, remains the most powerful force capable of rebuilding even the most shattered lives completely, permanently, and forever.